What's up, guys? Welcome to JR Strength and Fitness, your friendly YouTube channel with all of your exercise science needs, your reaction video wants, and of course some exercise tutorials hopefully in the near future, because why the heck not?
You can say hello, but I don't need you to like.
So this is just going to be a really quick video going over the difference between a compound and isolation exercise, but not only the definitions for them, but the practical applications for them in your training endeavors. So if you're new for the channel, please like and subscribe. We kind of go over a bunch of the different exercise science stuff that goes in to all of your training endeavors. So for the most part, we try to keep it very simple. We try to keep it very straightforward. And I basically try to just give you certain tools that will help you get successful in whatever sort of endeavors you have in the gym. Again, full disclaimer, while I am an exercise professional, please do not do anything that I say or do because I just say them. Obviously, go see an exercise professional, go see a physician, etc, etc, etc. The reason why I want to break down compound and isolation exercise is that because still, this is 2021 right now that I'm recording this video, there are still people that might understand what the difference between a compound and isolation exercise are. The application of it is still not quite what it should be. So I kind of want to break it down for you, how I implement them to the best possible optimal way you can possibly do for your training. And this is personally what I do for myself, my clients, and everyone that I ever tell how to train. Let's get the definitions out of the way first because that's the easiest place to start. When we talk about compound movements when it comes to exercise and gym stuff is pretty much any sort of movement or exercise that utilizes multiple joints at any given movement. For example, you can think about the squat. When you squat down, your ankles are moving, your knee is moving, your hip is moving, and well, ideally the torso should be relatively rigid, but you kind of understand the point. When I do a deadlift, I'm hinging at the hip, slight bend in the knee, maybe a little bend in the ankle, very, very minimal. Or for a bench press, for example, I'm moving at the elbow, I'm moving at the shoulder, etc. You have multiple joints moving at the exact same time in tandem with each other because in a given movement or exercise, everything is connected up or down the chain. A movement, like a compound movement that we're talking about right now, is integrating multiple different joints in order to complete a certain task, aka the squat. Now, because they use multiple joints at any given moment, they also use more muscle. For example, on the bench press, because I am moving the elbow and the shoulder, I'm having elbow flexion, and then B, having adduction at the shoulder. Think about it this way, there's multiple things going on in a squat, for example. So on a squat, when I'm squatting down, I need to A, push my butt back, I need to bend the knees a little bit in order to actually, get down. And then I need that ankle to be a little bit mobile so I can drive the knees a little past the toe. It's not like, back in the good old days, back when the doctors used to tell you like, hey, don't squat with the knees past the tail. That's a whole completely different video, but for the most part, it's a myth. For the most part, you kind of understand that multiple joints, multiple muscles are being utilized at any given moment. When it comes to an isolation exercise, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the complete opposite. We are isolating a given muscle, aka one joint, one muscle, mostly one muscle, but for the most part, think about just a single joint movement, like a bicep curl or a leg extension, where there's not really much movement going on. We are just isolating a given muscle. They're pretty straightforward as far as the definitions go, but how to apply them in the most optimal way possible is where things get a little tricky. I still, to this day, I see guys going to the gym, pumping out some bicep curls, and then maybe doing some rows of the sort, or I see them just trying to hammer out a bunch of calf raises. I'm like, dude, come on. And I'm not gonna lie, it takes a lot of self-discipline to not go over there and tell them how wrong they are. Obviously, I'm supposed to make sure people are doing things correctly, but it's so hard to just let it go. They're not paying me, they're not asking for help, so I'm not gonna say anything. Here's how optimal training looks like. Ideally, you would start with your compound movements at the beginning of your workout, aka the squats, the deadlift, the bench press, the overhead press, the pull-ups of the world, any sort of movement that utilizes multiple joints or the most muscle. And why would you possibly do this before? I've seen people do isolation exercises before, like bicep curls or leg extension, or actually get this. I've actually heard people make the argument before that, oh, if I tax out my biceps, then I'll use more back on my lat pull down or my seated row. Or I'm gonna get on the leg extension machine, knock out a bunch of leg extensions, fatigue out my quads. Therefore, when I'm doing my squats, I'm gonna use more glutes because my quads are fatigued. While that's theoretically true, it is not optimal as far as training goes. Because on those given compound movements like the squat, on the deadlift, whatever you're trying to do, you are trying to optimize as much muscle as possible, as much motor recruitment as possible. The reason why a compound movement is very effective, and you'll know what I'm talking about in a second, but let's say you do a heavy deadlift or a heavy back squat. If something's feeling weak, if something's feeling tired, it is going to make a huge difference on the absolute amount of volume you're going to do. Either you're going to do less reps, either you're going to cut your sets short, or you're just not going to lift as much weight. Why this is detrimental is another point. So think about it this way. If I'm trying to get bigger, stronger, faster, whatever it is, I want my muscles to be functioning at high capacity for any given movement, specifically movements that are very, very specific to our goal. If I'm trying to get stronger, your compound movements are the movements that are going to get you stronger because you're going to utilize more muscles. You're going to utilize more muscle recruitment, and because you're going to utilize more muscle recruitment, you need more neural activation, which is a skill component when it comes to developing strength. Obviously, gaining more muscle is a huge part of it. Obviously, just learning movements is part of it, but the neural activation is an actual skill that takes sometimes years for people to develop. When you look at an elite powerlifter or an elite Olympic weightlifter or someone that's just been at the gym at it for 10, 20 years or so, the reason why they have become very, very strong is not only have they developed the musculature in order to handle these weights, the tensile strength of their tendons and ligaments, all the other stuff is great and all, but they have learned how to be very neurologically efficient. They learned how to recruit more motor units at any given task. They learned how to, increase the rate coding, which is like recruiting more motor units like at a faster rate, for example. Just to reiterate, compound movements use more musculature because they are moving more joints at any given movement. Because they are utilizing more muscles, it increases the amount of motor recruitment. Because there is an increased amount of motor recruitment, you become more neurologically efficient. You learn how to be more efficient. And because you learn how to be more efficient neurologically, you get stronger. If your goal is to get stronger, you're going to want to emphasize those compound movements as far as getting heavy, getting big with them. Now, I'm not saying you max out all the time. Those movements were designed for you to push the envelope a little bit so you can increase that neurological efficiency, so you can maximize the amount of motor recruitment. That is what is going to get you stronger. Also with those compound movements is because you are utilizing more musculature at any given rep, you are getting more bang for your dollar as far as developing more muscle. Across the board, it's suggested about 2 to 3 times a week of a given muscle group. Sometimes they're gonna say about 12 to 20 sets of a given muscle group across the week is the most optimum way to develop muscle. You can't just hammer out, one given muscle once a week or every now and then and get that, sweet pump and call it good. Now, there's a progressive overload that is required for them. Let's say a squat, for example. Every time I squat and I progressively get heavier with them, either doing more reps, more sets, more weight, etc., I'm going to, alongside becoming more neurologically efficient to get stronger. Because I get stronger, I'm able to increase my volume output, which is the sets times reps times the weight. That will need to go up. Once that starts to go up it doesn't go up in a straight line like a linear line, but you kind of understand after about 6 months, it's gonna look relatively straight. But for the most part, deviations throughout the week, throughout months maybe, it occurs. But for the most part, that progressive overload is what's going to guide that kind of increase of strength and increase of lean muscle mass. Let's take a back squat like we just kind of broke down. And let's place it right next to, let's throw in a leg extension machine. Let's throw in the hip extension. Let's throw in the, abductor machines. Boom. Let's even throw in some calf raises. Whatever sort of lower body exercise you want to do. Shoot, let's even throw in some back extensions or some, crunches or whatever. For the most part, the back squat covers that entire spectrum of things we just listed. Instead of doing, 5 different exercises, you're doing one exercise. That's A, getting heavier, and B, you're actually moving your body, which means if you're trying to lose weight or burn some extra calories, you are probably going to burn more from a back squat because it utilizes more muscle. Because it utilizes more muscle, there is a lot more oxygen that needs to be flowing through the muscles, and therefore you're going to expend more energy. When it comes to compound movements, A, they're going to make you stronger because they are going to utilize more musculature, therefore increasing neural activation, and then you learn how to become more neurologically efficient, which is a driving force when it comes to strength. The second part is not only can we take that strength and apply it into our overall volume, you use more musculature in a given movement like the squat, therefore you're going to get more bang for your dollar as far as trying to build more muscle. And the third thing, like we said, if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to burn some extra calories, the compound movements are what's going to elicit more energy expenditure because you are utilizing more musculature at any given rep. So you got to take it like that kind of trade-off. So how much time do I have? How much time and energy am I willing to put into this and get the most out of it? The compound movements are what's going to do it. Now, when it comes to isolation exercises, we kind of mentioned bicep curls, we mentioned leg extension, chest flies, lateral raises, any sort of movement that is occurring at one given joint and we're only using maybe one or a couple different muscles, then, well, you kind of understand breaking down the compound movements, exactly what the trade-off is. Now, I'm not saying they don't have a place, because they do have a place. And there are a lot of people, CrossFit, who look down on isolation exercises as a waste of time, or the people that worship the concept of functional training. And if it's not functional, we're not doing it, it's a waste of time. Those people can go be functional in some random box that they feel comfortable with. But if you're trying to get bigger, stronger, or faster, there are ways and you can implement isolation exercise to the most beneficial aspect of whatever training you are doing. Isolation exercises provide a couple different areas of benefit. For the most part, because you are able to isolate a given muscle, if you're trying to do bodybuilding or physique competing where you have a very focused aesthetic goal, then you can tailor your training to whatever area of the body you feel like you need to improve upon. You need to gain a little bit more mass here, etc. So obviously there's no such thing as spot reduction. So you can't just like, oh, I don't want this belly, so I'm just gonna do a bunch of That's not really how it works. But if you're all like, ooh, you know what? I think my biceps are a little small compared to the rest of my body. And that's what most men think. For the most part, they're just gonna knock out a bunch of bicep curls to hopefully increase the amount of volume in the bicep. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Or the ladies, I know the ladies when they talk about like, you know what, I really want a bigger butt. I really want a bigger butt, but I don't necessarily want bigger thighs. Okay, like sure, we can kind of do that if you want that Kim Kardashian life. But for the most part, we can do glute thrusts, we can do hip extensions, we can isolate given muscles. So we get to focus on increasing muscle at any given area. So that's one of the main benefits to isolation exercises. The other area is I want to increase local muscle endurance at any given place. I'm a runner, somewhat long distance, even trail running. And for the most part, everything feels good aerobically. I feel like I'm like as fit and as healthy as possible, but I feel like my legs just kind of like fail out on me. Like, okay, we can kind of train, even use training concepts like training to failure, even drop sets. You can do that at isolation exercises because there's not that injury trade-off that you have to worry about. Like, okay, once my muscle is tired, it's done. I'm good for that set. If I feel like my quads just get tired and blown up every time I do anything, then I can do some of these isolation exercises like the leg extension just to focus on local muscle endurance. So that is something you can do. And that's typically what people do when it comes to the core exercises. Like, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When they target their abs, they do a bunch of crunches or leg lifts or whatever the hell they're doing, like a bunch of them. That is local muscle endurance. The third thing, it mostly has to do with sports performance, and in which case I am going to emphasize strength, an eccentric component of strength or a deacceleration component in certain muscles that play a huge role in whatever sport. So if I have an overhead athlete, yeah, you best believe we're probably gonna do some isolation exercises for the shoulder, for the rotator cuff, triceps maybe even, because triceps are important when it comes to overhead stability, when it comes to, you know, mechanics of the shoulder, which we don't necessarily need to get into because that's a whole completely different video. Or I have a soccer athlete, I have a sprinter, like, hey, we need to do some Nordic curls. We need to focus on getting the hamstrings really, really strong, not only strong concentrically like a leg curl or a deadlift, but for the most part, they need to be able to deaccelerate because they are your brakes on the car, for example. On the Nordic curl, I'm focusing on that long, slow, controlled, eccentric part of the movement. Deacceleration is a huge part when it comes to hamstrings, so we need to make sure the hamstrings are like solid and good to go. Maybe I have a athlete who is a jumper or basketball player or volleyball or whatever it is that requires a lot of jumping. Like, okay, maybe we're gonna do some focus on the calves a little bit. For the most part, isolation exercises has 3 main components. You can probably throw in a couple different components in it, but 3 things that I think about is A, I get to emphasize a little bit more volume at any given muscle in order to increase the muscle size for aesthetic purposes, whatever it might be. And B, I get to focus on local muscle endurance at any given muscle that I feel that is lagging behind some of the other muscles. And third, I get to emphasize certain aspects of a musculature for sports performance purposes and training. So we kind of broke down the definitions. Now we kind of labeled out the benefits that each have. And obviously you notice that both of them have benefits in some shape or form, depending on what your goal is. I'm not gonna just give you a random percentage of like how much percentage of compound, how much percentage of isolation. That is it's different from person to person. If you're very focused on bodybuilding and aesthetics, you might be doing more isolation than compound movement. If you're very focused on strength and sports performance, you're probably gonna do more compound movements. If you're trying to lose weight, but also kind of like tone out a little bit, AKA lean out with that lean muscle mass, then you might have a pretty well even split of it. It really depends on your goal. So there is no magical percentage split. Like it's not like a 60-40, 70-30, 90-10, even though that would be ridiculous. There's no magical split like that. All I can really just give you is how to utilize them in a given workout so that the percentage will not really matter. Because of the benefits that we labeled out for compound movements as far as increasing neurological efficiency for strength, utilizing more musculature, because you're utilizing more musculature, you are going to expend more energy. Because of that, those typically will be at the beginning of a workout if you're focusing on that neurological aspect as far as, you know, getting stronger. If you're doing some sort of interval training style, if you're doing some sort of circuit weight training or cardio or some sort of oriented metabolic conditioning, then it can be placed whenever. And I would highly suggest just focusing on those movements when you do something like that, like a high intensity interval training. Focus on the squats, focus on the deadlifts, focus on the push-ups, like full body weight movement, compound movements are the way to go. Now, then you tailor the isolation exercises at the end after you focus on the compound movements, because the isolation exercises are your accessory list. This is where you're just gonna add a little extra volume if you're trying to increase size at a given area. So after I focus on my pull-ups and my heavy rows, then I'm gonna do some bicep curls because I feel like they can get a little bit more volume in there. Okay, fair enough. Okay, got my heavy deadlifts in. Now it's time to focus on some isolation exercises that will help me get better at my deadlift. AKA I can do some hip extensions. I can do some leg curls. I can do some Supermans, like something to A, get the back stronger, to get the glute stronger, to get the hamstring stronger, whatever it is, just to apply a little bit more either muscle endurance or volume at a given muscle that will help these compound movements. Let me go over it just one more time, really briefly. That way I feel comfortable with people knowing exactly what I'm trying to get across. I value compound movements because of the amount of benefit they have as far as A, utilizing more musculature, A, it's going to increase strength, B, you're going to increase lean muscle mass, and C, you're going to expend more energy at any given movement. Because of those three things, they are going to maybe be the bulk of your whole training because of how much benefit they provide for the least amount of overall work. For the most part, you tailor them towards the beginning because you can focus on the strength aspect, and they're going to be your main benchmarks as far as like quantifying how strong you're getting, evaluating progress over time, because the bicep curl is not going to increase like a pull-up well or a bench press or squat, etc. So you get to focus on those things. Again, when we talked about the accessory list, we're trying to increase volume at a given muscle. We're either trying to increase local muscle endurance, or if it has a very sport specific or a very important goal for whatever thing you are doing. Now, like I said, we tailored towards the end. That way we are utilizing them as accessory. They are secondary compared to our compound movements, which are going to give us the most bang for our dollar. And you'll probably even find this out too. So I'll even just tell you a story a little bit. So I've trained many different people before. And when it comes to young men, either in the high school or early 20s, there's this huge emphasis of doing a bunch of bicep curls, bunch of chest flies, etc., trying to beef up those specific areas that they're focusing on. Now, what I did is that I took some of these. I took like one kid, for example. It's like, hey, I bet if you start doing heavy pull-ups, heavy dips, heavy like weighted push-ups, and focus on getting stronger and heavier with that, I think we're gonna be pretty good. What he told me, what he noticed was his arms actually got bigger. He was doing like pull-ups with like, I'm talking like 55, 60 pounds maybe. That right there is going to utilize everything. Instead of doing a bunch of different bicep curls, doing a bunch of isolation exercises, that's not wrong, but you're probably going to actually get bigger arms just from focusing on those compound movements, because every time you do a compound movement, you are utilizing those smaller muscles. When you do a row, you are utilizing your biceps. Maybe not in the same way as a curl, but you are doing them nonetheless. That's why they are a compound movement. Anyway, hopefully this kind of just broke down the difference between compound movements and isolation exercises, and when to do them and how to do them. Here at JR Strength and Fitness, we're trying to train smarter, not necessarily harder. If you're smart about your training, you'll get to your goal and still enjoy it at the same time. Avoiding the injuries, avoiding the burnout, still enjoying the good things in life. Like, hey, you don't want to live at the gym every single day. That's my job. You want to get in, get out, and reap the benefits. Hopefully this was valuable for people. Again, please like and subscribe. Let your friends know about me.
You can say hello.